In this video, we're going to have a look at how the examiner gives you your score. Once you know what the examiner wants, you can work on these areas of your speaking. When you're speaking in the IELTS test, the examiner is listening very carefully so they can give you the band score you deserve. It is very important you understand what they're listening for, so you can focus your practice on improving these areas and improve your ability to reach the requirements of the band score you are aiming for. The examiner will be analysing 4 main areas of your speaking. The first one we're going to look at is fluency and coherence. Fluency is your ability to speak at an appropriate speed, not too slow, but also not too fast, and without too many hesitations, pausing for too long. But it is not only the speed of your speaking which affects your fluency, it's also the length of your answers. They must fit the question you're being asked. Not too short and not too long. If it's a simple question, you only need to give a short answer. But if it's a more complex question, then you are expected to give a longer answer. Now, coherence is your ability to be understood. You must develop your answers in a logical way and connect sentences so your answers are easy to understand for the listener. This is an area of your English which you can only improve with a lot of practice. However, if you focus on fluency and coherence when you are speaking while you practice, other areas the examiner is going to give you band scores for can improve without too much difficulty. One other area is lexical resource. To put it simply, they are listening to the vocabulary you use. They are making sure that you fully understand the words you are using and that you use them in the correct context. They are focused on your range of vocabulary, so there is no point panicking about learning lots of complex academic vocabulary. To get a high band score in this area, you have to use language that a native speaker would probably use in their everyday life. A wide range of vocabulary would still include simple words, but there would be very little repetition. Idiomatic language can also help you get a high score, but we'll talk more about this later in the course. The problem with lexical resource is that if you focus too much on it, you will firstly hesitate more and slow down your fluency. And secondly, you'll probably try to use more complex words which you may not fully understand, making you use them in the wrong context or just incorrectly in the sentence. Despite this, it is important to be gradually building your range of vocabulary. It is a long process, but it can be quite enjoyable if done well. The third area the examiner will be listening out for is your grammatical range and accuracy. So, accuracy is important. The sentences you use should be as error-free as possible. Mistakes are really to be expected though, and high band scores can be achieved even if you make grammatical errors. There may be someone who speaks with no errors at all, but still gets a low score. This is because you need to show a wide range of grammar. If you speak perfectly but with only simple sentence structures and use only one tense, your score might be quite low. The key here is your range of grammar. You should have a mix of simple and complex structures and show a wide range of both. Grammar is obviously important when learning English. But the problem is that when you're speaking in the exam, you have no time to think about the grammar you are using if you want to keep your fluency. This is where your preparation is important. Practicing speaking about different periods of time and consciously thinking about the grammar of questions and using it in your answers. This needs to come to you naturally and without thought in the test. And the only way to make this happen is with lots of practice. The final part of your speech the examiner will be assessing is your pronunciation. Your speech must be clear and easily understood. You need to be able to show an ability to use word and sentence stress, intonation, and rhythm to communicate effectively. To get a high band score for pronunciation, you will have to use these features naturally and with very few errors. It is fine to have an accent from your native language, but you must be using English sounds when you speak. Improving this is a challenge, and the best results take time. You need to focus on imitation of a good model, and feedback from a native speaker can also be very helpful. You will be teaching your mouth to make different shapes to produce new sounds, and this will take a lot of repetition to train different muscles in your mouth. Now, I'd just like to show you the official band descriptors and go into a bit more detail on each of the areas so you can really see what you need to be doing in the test. The fact that you've taken this video course means you're probably aiming for a band score of somewhere between 6.5 and 9. Because of this, I'm going to be focusing on the band 7 and 8 descriptors. If you're looking to get band 6.5, your aim really needs to be 7. Focusing on band 6 descriptors may mean you fall short of 6.5. If you focus on band 7, then even if you fall a bit short, you should still get the 6.5 score you're wanting. It is also a good idea to understand the difference between band 6 and band 7. Now we're looking at band 9 for those of you who are aiming really high. So, band 7 for fluency and coherence. You can see here you need to give long answers that can be understood, but also appropriate to the question. And you need to sound like it's not too much effort for you to do this. We can also see that hesitation is still allowed. This is the language-related hesitation, which means you're trying to find a specific word in your head and you're pausing to think. It's fine to repeat yourself a bit and go back to correct your own mistakes. This band score also requires you to use connectives and discourse markers. These can be linking words in a sentence, such as however, but, and, or so. These words will connect ideas and sentences to make your speaking easier to listen to. Discourse markers is language native speakers use for a variety of reasons, but usually the main idea of them is to help the listener know what you are telling them. Words such as anyway, to show a change in topic or bring yourself back to focus on a topic. Right, sometimes to agree with what someone says, or, well, to show thought about what someone says. This type of language is great, but it's difficult to use naturally. Some of my students try very hard to use this language, so sometimes it sounds a bit overused, or they make errors with the word choice and it affects the understanding of the listener. However, for Band 7 you don't need to use them perfectly, but just usually in the correct way. Now, jumping to Band 9. We can see now you need complete fluency, length and speed, and less repetition or self-correction, but it is still allowed. The type of hesitation allowed is a bit different. Content-related hesitation is pausing for thought on your ideas and not thinking about vocabulary or grammar. This is something natural, which native speakers will do in conversation. We can also see you need to be completely understood by the examiner, and the connective language should be used with no mistakes at all. This is not easy to achieve, but it's certainly a good aim to have, and definitely an achievable one for all of us. Now, let's have a look at Band 7 for lexical resource. You can see here that we need a wide enough vocabulary to talk about a variety of topics, which might come up in the test. You can see one of the key differences between Band 6 and Band 7 is that the examiner wants you to use less common vocabulary. So instead of using very common words such as big and small, you try to use words that might be used less often by non-native speakers, such as massive and tiny. Here we can also see we need to try to use idiomatic vocabulary. These are words and phrases that are being used with a different meaning to its literal one. It's often very difficult to guess the meaning of this vocabulary, but context can help a lot. Single words like cool, the literal meaning to describe a low temperature, but then idiomatically it can be used to describe something which is of interest to someone. Idiomatic phrases like to feel over the moon, meaning to feel very happy or pleased about something, is part of your speech that the examiner will be listening for. Also, language such as phrasal verbs, where a preposition changes the literal meaning of a verb. Something like give up, which means to stop doing something. You can see you're allowed some inappropriate choices, so it's okay to make some mistakes as long as you try to use idiomatic language. Collocation is also important. You must fit words together in the appropriate way, in the style that a native speaker might use vocabulary. An example of this would be how we join adjectives and nouns. We would usually say a fast train and not a quick train. But usually we say a quick shower, not a fast shower. Or also how we join nouns and verbs, like a lion roars. It does not shout. Finally, you can see you need to show you can paraphrase. This is basically changing the vocabulary in the examiner's question in your answer to communicate the same meaning. Now, if we move to Band 9, you can see it's quite similar to Band 7, but there is no room for error. All the vocabulary you use should be completely accurate in all topics. The idiomatic language you use must also sound natural and error-free. Now, moving to look at Band 7 for grammatical range and accuracy. you need to use a range of complex structures. The focus here is complex and not simple. So your sentences will have to use structures which include one verb clause and one or more adverb clauses. For example, he passed his test because he worked really hard and didn't party too much. So at the beginning of the sentence you can see the verb clause, and it is followed by the adverb clause. There are different combinations of the adverb and verb clause but you can use, and also structures such as compound complex sentences, noun and adjective clauses. However, it does tell us that you only require some flexibility. So at times it's okay if it sounds a bit forced or there's a couple of errors. Flexibility is one big difference between band 6 and 7. As we move higher up the band scores, there is increasing flexibility with grammar. We can also see you need to often use sentences without grammatical errors. But it's okay to have some mistakes, just not as many as band 6. You can see in band 6 we can make frequent mistakes. Band 9 is looking for an even wider range of structures, and they must be produced without effort and fit the purpose of the speech. But even at this stage you are allowed errors. But these are slips, which you will sometimes hear in native speakers. An example of this is when you might hear someone say different from instead of different than. In a sentence, it could look something like this. The class is different than the one last week. This would be incorrect, but a common mistake made by native speakers. It should really be said like this. The class is different from the one last week. Finally, let's look in a bit more detail at the pronunciation band descriptors. For a band 7, you can see you must show the positive features of band 6, but not all of band 8. So, let's have a quick look at band 6 first. Here we can see you need to use some pronunciation features. This ranges from the simple, such as saying individual words correctly, to the slightly more difficult, like sentence stress, intonation and rhythm. But for band 6, you only have to attempt to use these features. Band 8 differs in that it needs only occasional lapses, so fewer mistakes. Band 7 will then be somewhere in between the two. Another positive feature of band 6 is that your pronunciation should be generally understandable, but there is room for error. Band 8 wants your pronunciation to be easily understandable, with only a tiny amount of errors. So band 7 is for students who fit right in the middle of the 6 and 8 band descriptors. With band 9, you obviously need to show a wide range of features, such as individual sounds, word stress, sentence stress, intonation, connected speech, and rhythm. And it is not just trying to use these features. It has to seem like you're using them without much effort. Really, you need to be able to use pronunciation features in the way a native speaker would. But you do not have to worry about having a British or an American accent. The accent from your own native language is okay to have, as long as you're using the English sounds and the accent does not affect the understanding of the examiner. Well, there we have it. You should now have a good idea of what the examiner is looking for when they're listening to you. We've gone through a lot of information there, so it might be a good idea to just summarize each of the areas by giving the main thing to focus on when practicing. Now, to show fluency and coherence, you want to try to limit the amount of hesitation you make. It must seem like it does not take much effort to speak in English. For lexical resource, you must use a range of vocabulary and use it as much like a native speaker as you can. For grammatical range and accuracy, you need to try to speak without mistakes as much as you can. And for pronunciation, really, you just need to focus on speaking clearly. Well, now it's time to think about how we can give them what they want. In the next video, I'll be moving on to the first part of the speaking test and looking at some common topics which come up. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video useful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos in the speaking course.